everybody, this is the assembly video for month 5. I'm not going to tell you this one's easy. This is not a leave the day before class. I've spent the better part of a couple of hours prepping these steps, and so you're going to want to give yourself some time. Tools you're going to need. You are going to need a square ruler. I have my 6.5 inch square. You are going to need a strip cutter ruler to cut certain things. And then if you like to do your stitch and flips using the folded corner ruler, which we showed last month, you are going to need that. I promise you are going to need a seam ripper and a marking pencil. So those are all of the things that I used this month to get this block done. So if you look at the instructions, step 1 is strip piecing, okay? So we are going to take the 2 inch by, I don't remember what length they are, 8.5 inch strips or whatever length you cut from the strip, and you're going to sew them together along the long edge, and then you're going to press towards the darker color. So that's going to give you what we call a strip set, okay? Now, we have to cut this strip set into 4 2.5 inch segments. And I wanted to show you, or as a reminder, since it's been a while since we've done one, when you cut a strip set, you want to make sure that you have your straight line on your ruler on the seam line. So I'm going to clean cut an edge here, and then I'm going to turn it over, and you will ultimately cut 4 2 inch strips out of here. But each time I cut, I'm making sure this is straight and this is on the seam. And so there's 1, and I probably don't need to cut, I'll cut 2, I don't need to cut all 4, but I'm going to cut that one, and I would keep going until I had 4 of these segments. Okay, so that's step 1. I'll set that aside. All right, step 2 is that you're going to take these and you are going to sew. Let me grab a couple, I didn't prep that. You are going to sew a 2 by 3.5 inch rectangle on each side. Now, you're going to need 2 where they're on the left and 2 where they're on the right. Now I'm going to stop right here and tell you that when you press all of this fabric before you start, especially with spotted, but I'm guessing with all of them, I know for sure the art gallery too, we're going to be doing a lot of interesting seam matching and sewing on the bias, and you are going to want to really starch your fabrics. I started this project and I hadn't starched, and I was having a heck of a time getting my seams to match. So I strongly recommend, I soaked my fabric with Best Press and then pressed it so you can see it's got crispness to it, as opposed to one that isn't, and you can just kind of see how floppy the difference is. And you just definitely want the crispness for this block for sure. Okay, so you're just going to flip these over and sew a 1/4 inch seam. And you're going to make 4 of these. These are going to be our 4 corners, okay? And again, we're going to press towards the darker color. So you'll have 4 of those when you get done, okay? So we're going to set those aside. They will come into play in a little bit. All right, now the next thing we have to do is make our center block. And if you, you don't have, if you look up here, this square right here is what we're going to make now, okay? So you are going to start with your a 3.5 inch, and this is your color 1 square, and you're going to sew a 2 by 3.5 inch rectangle, background rectangle on each side, like that, okay? Then you're going to take 2 3.5 by 2 inch and 2 2 inch squares, and you're going to make 2 sets of these strip sets that are going to go top and bottom to the center you just made. So if you look at that, and again we're pressing towards the darker color. So this was the center you made. This is 1 strip. Now we would take this strip and we're going to put it down here. Okay, it makes basically a 9 patch. And if you flip that over, you can see I've got my seams pressed in opposite directions, so it's easy to match my seams, and I will sew a 1/4 inch square. Okay, so that is your center square, and that's going to measure 6.5 inches at this point. Okay, so you can set that aside. Now comes the not so easy part. The first thing we're going to do is we have cut 8 3.5 inch squares out of a color. Okay, we have to do a stitch and flip like we did last month on each corner. So if you look at, if I put this down and this is where we're heading, at this is your 3.5 inch square, you can see we have put a square on opposite corners. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to do that. Like last month, I've got it set up to do 2 different ways. So this way, you would draw a line, that's why you need your marking pencil and a ruler. You would draw a line from on one diagonal on all of your 2 inch squares, okay? You would then pin this, and I recommend pinning it into the corner to keep it still, and you're gonna sew from this point to this point. Now the reason you want this starched is because you're sewing on the diagonal, it's so stretchy and it's really easy to stretch it out. Once that is sewn on, flip this over so you can see now I have 1 layer, I have 2 layers, and I have 3 layers. And we need to press this up into the corner. And so I like to take this middle layer and I'm gonna trim that down to a 1/4 inch. Get that? And I just put my 1/4 inch line. It doesn't have to be super fancy because I'm gonna open this back up, okay? And the reason I did that was so that I could take this corner and I could force this to match my square underneath. And if hopefully you stitched nice and straight. And if you stitch a scant 1/4 inch, just a little tiny bit less, it's a little easier to flip up. But you're gonna press that into shape so that you don't see any blue. We got a little bit there, it's doable, okay? And then I would flip this down and I would put this back on that seam. That's why the first one wasn't too critical. And I would go ahead and trim this off. And now I have half of my block done, okay? I'm gonna repeat exactly the same thing on the other side, which you can see here. If this one was up, this would be my other side. And that would give me one of these finished blocks. You have to make 8 of these, okay? So this is gonna take some time. So you want to work on that, all right? Or you can use the folded corner trimmer, okay? This is the ruler we talked about last month. If you bought it or if you're on the list for one, they're on the way. And what that involves is pre-cutting your square. So if I take my 3 or 2 inch square and I put it into this corner, I'm gonna take this ruler and lay it down so that this line is actually on the diagonal where we're going to sew. And then I am going to just clip this, pre-clip it versus post-clip it. And then I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam, which in reality should dissect the 2 points. Again, I would suggest maybe a scant 1/4 so that you have room to flip that up, okay? So I've sewn that on the other side. Now when you go to flip this up, notice you don't have a square underneath to make sure it measures to. So what I like to do is I like to put a square underneath and I like to line up to make sure that it's square, and then, sorry about that, I can flip this up and I can make this again align with the square underneath it, and then hold it in place and press so that I have that nice and square.
And we don't recommend pressing on mats.
No, I'm doing that for the camera's sake, but all right, so you want to keep this as square as possible. The pressing is where things can really get a little bit distorted, And you want to be careful, and you want to be careful that you're getting very close to dissecting those points in
Show
there.
that. Show it to the camera.
Okay.
There you go.
That you're very close to dissecting those points, because if you get too off on each time you do it, if you're up or down, the next thing we got to do is match these points, so we need to have them hitting in the right place here. Okay, so you have 8 of these to make. That will ultimately, I've got this one going, that they're going to look like this, and I'm going to press this one real quickly, and I'll do it on the mat.
It can just destroy.
And I'm not going to put the square underneath. I'm just going to, well, this mat's already history anyway. I'm just going to do this, okay? So that when you're done, you can see. They should look like this, okay? All right, so now you're going to have 8 of these, and we have to sew them together in pairs. Now, that sounds easy, pretty easy, until you realize that when I look at this, I'm going to unpin this. When you go to put these together like this, you can see that you have a match point. These two are going to have to match so that when we open them, the peaks are together. They are matched together, and don't look too closely, but you can see this one's actually pretty good, except for that pink thread right there. You want them so that they're kissing each other right at the seam. And that's going to happen 1/4 inch in. It's driving me crazy. Okay, all right, so match point on these, sometimes I find it's just easier. You can see because they're both pressed the same way. We need, then you see those 2 points need to basically be on top of each other. I like to start by pinning my corners, because otherwise it's so easy while trying to match the seams to come up short or long on one of the ends. So I pin that, then I come and I line that up, and I just kind of pinch my finger right there at the point to make sure they're on top of each other. And I put another pin right here to kind of hold that. And then I come back and I force my tops to match. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew that and hold my breath that it matches. Now, I told Michelle I wasn't going to sew, but I'm just real quickly going to baste over that match point, because I want to show you that you don't want to sew the whole seam. I just sew kind of, I didn't sew very straight, but it's hard to do on the side. I think I sewed straight where it was important, which is right here. So what I did was I just sewed over the match point so that I could open this up. Oh, it worked. And I could see that, yes, I have that matched. Oh, maybe a teeny tiny little bit, but boy, I'm telling you, this is more than, if you can see that that's not matched, then you're better than me. So once I know that that's matched, I'm going to go ahead and put this in, and I would sew the rest of the seam. And then on this seam, I would recommend that you press it open, because there's so much bulk with them both going the same way. If you press it open, it's going to let this seam be much smoother, and it, you know, when you go there, all that bulk's not going to be built up on each other. The other thing is when you press it open, you can tell that it matches because those two things touch right there. Not that at this point it matters, you should already know that, okay? So you're going to make 4 of these, and I would do that first and focus on this match point and get that done, okay? Then I'd go have a glass of wine, and then I'd come back, because the next thing we're going to do is we've made 4 of these, and when we sew this onto here, we have another match point here, okay? The good news is the 2 that go on the center, when you look at them, there is no match point there. So I would do the middle row first and go, phew, that was easy, okay? And so to do this match point, again, you're going to place this right sides together, and I don't have one of these prepped. I'm just going to show, I'm going to open this up a little bit so that I can show you how I match this. I told you you would need one of these. I'm going to show you. And again, I like to, when I'm matching the points here, I actually said that a couple times. I like to check my match point before. But when we come to match this, okay, you've got this point and you've got this square. So you're matching, again, a diagonal to a square seam. And what I like to do is when this is loose, if I just flip this over, where that seam hits my seam allowance, do that like that, right there, that's where the point should be touching underneath. And remember, I didn't sew that all the way to the point, but that's approximately where you want it to be, okay? I like to pin the bottom, and then I come up here and I can eyeball, and if you want to put a dot 1/4 inch up from that seam, you could certainly do that, and that's where that point should hit. And then I pin there, and then I usually pin a little bit up there. This one's actually a little easier to do than the 2 diagonals. And then if you're unsure or you want to check it, again, I would sew from there to there where I unsewed, and then I would open it up and I would check that that point is right where that point, those things match, okay? And you've got to do that on each side of the top and bottom row at that point, okay? Now, at this point, all that's left is sewing the rows together. So if we look at this, I don't have 2 more made, but they're going to go here. The only places you're going to have match points, they're not going to be diagonal anymore if we look in here, is this is super easy. It's going to be where your seams match. Oh, I take that back. You're going to have to line that one up top and bottom, okay? So if you look where this comes together right here, you have match points there. So, sorry about that. You are going to have to match those. Okay, and again, you're just going to flip that over, and this will be in the seam allowance, and you're going to check that that point hits where that seam allowance flips over. That's how I start it, and then I work my way through, and you'll have those 2 to match up. Okay, lots of match points this month, lots of pressing, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you super starch your fabrics. When they're stiff, they're less likely to slip and slide. The issues I had before I starched is, and I was not working on my machine and not the foot I like to use, is when I was sewing my corners on, I was having a lot of issues with at the bottom it's starting to stretch when it got to the front of the presser foot, and it was going off, and so this wasn't hit, one end wasn't hitting in the right place, which made it hard to match your seams. So use a stylus. I used my seam ripper to hold that seam and guide that all the way into the needle so that I was sure that this didn't slip as it went under the foot. Dual feed helps avoid that tremendously. And then the other issue I was having, besides that not wanting to stretch, is that when I was coming over the thicknesses at the match point, again, dual feed helps with this if you have it. The machine kept wanting to take a little detour to the south, so my seam allowance over my hump was less than the seam allowance on each side, which was also causing issues with the match point. You need to really sew straight through here, so you want to make sure that you use a stylus, again, dual feed or something, so that this, when you hit this, it doesn't decide that it wants to go south. You can also lower the pressure on your presser foot if you're having trouble with that for thicknesses, and it'll help go straight across. So I hope I didn't scare you away. This is a tough block, I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely a difficult block, but we're at that point, we're almost halfway, where you gotta start challenging yourself. So this one will be a challenge, so give yourself time and enjoy the process of learning how to match all of these interesting intersections that come together. And thanks for your time today.